Picture this: a woman kneeling by a fire, close enough to feel the heat on her face, while just beyond the light, a pair of eyes catches the flicker and disappears into the dark. She doesn't scream, she doesn't run, she barely looks up. Somewhere, hundreds of thousands of years earlier, that same shadow would have meant instant panic, a spear gripped tight, every muscle ready to fight or flee. So what changed? How did the people who once lived in constant terror of claws and fangs eventually learn to sit calmly by the fire while predators prowled just outside the light? This is the story of how fear itself was rewritten, generation after generation, until the monsters of the night became just another part of life. For most of human history, fear of predators wasn't a phobia, it was common sense. Early hominins were not the top of the food chain, they were prey. Big cats, hyenas, wolves, and other large carnivores saw early humans as a viable meal, and the evidence backs this up. Fossilized bones with tooth marks, skulls punctured by predator jaws, and butchering sites that show early humans were sometimes the ones being butchered, not doing the butchering. In this world, fear wasn't weakness. Fear was survival. The individuals who felt nothing when a lion roared nearby didn't get the chance to pass on that fearlessness. They simply didn't survive long enough to have children. So evolution favored caution, vigilance, and a healthy dose of dread. But here's where the story gets interesting, because if fear was so useful, why did it eventually fade? The answer isn't that humans stopped being afraid. It's that they changed the rules of the game entirely. And on this channel, that's exactly the kind of shift we love digging into here at Prehistoric People. The moment when something that should have stayed the same suddenly didn't. The first big shift came with fire. Controlled fire changed everything about the relationship between early humans and predators. Before fire, darkness was pure vulnerability. Human eyes are poor in low light, while most predators are built for exactly those conditions, with better night vision, sharper hearing, and senses tuned for hunting after dusk. Once fire entered the picture, that vulnerability shrank dramatically. Flames created a circle of safety, a boundary most predators were biologically wired to avoid. Big cats, wolves, and other carnivores have an instinctive wariness of fire, likely shaped by their own evolutionary history of avoiding wildfires. Suddenly, humans had a tool that didn't just help them cook or stay warm, it gave them a nightly fortress, however fragile, and it meant that the paralyzing dread of nightfall could start to ease, just a little, group by group, generation by generation. If you're enjoying this deep dive into how fear evolved alongside us, stick around, because the next part of the story gets even stranger, and it's exactly why it's worth hitting subscribe now before we go further. The second shift was social, not physical. Early humans didn't just survive as individuals, they survived as groups, and group living fundamentally changes how fear operates. Imagine being alone in the dark versus surrounded by 20 other people. The math of vulnerability changes instantly. A predator has to consider not one target, but dozens of eyes, dozens of ears, and the very real chance that a coordinated group will fight back rather than flee. Group living created what researchers sometimes call a dilution effect. Even if a predator attacked, the odds of any single individual being the victim dropped sharply. On top of that, groups could take shifts. While some slept, others watched. This meant that no single person had to carry the full weight of constant vigilance through an entire night. The terror of facing the dark alone was replaced by a shared burden, spread across many shoulders, and shared burdens weigh less. This is one of the quieter reasons prehistoric people stopped being defined purely by fear. It wasn't that danger disappeared, it's that danger became a group problem instead of an individual one, and group problems feel very different from solitary nightmares. Then came tools, and this is where things really shift in favor of humans. A lone human with bare hands stands little chance against a hyena or a big cat. A human holding a sharpened spear, thrown with practiced accuracy, is an entirely different proposition. As stone tool technology advanced, from simple sharpened sticks to weighted spears, to eventually spear throwers that could launch a point with lethal force from a distance, the power balance between humans and predators began to tilt. This wasn't an overnight transformation. It took hundreds of thousands of years, spread across multiple hominin species, each generation refining what came before. But the trajectory is unmistakable. As weapons became deadlier and more reliable, the calculation predators had to make about attacking a human group became riskier for them, not just for us. A predator that might have once seen an easy meal increasingly encountered a creature capable of fighting back with lethal precision. And here's a genuinely wild detail. Some researchers argue that certain predator populations may have actually learned, over generations, to avoid human groups altogether, passing down a kind of ancestral caution in the opposite direction. If that's true, it means the fear didn't disappear, it just changed direction. What do you think? Does it feel strange to imagine predators developing their own version of caution around us? Drop a comment below telling us which shift surprised you most: the fire, the group living, or the weapons. Because honestly, they're all fascinating in different ways. Knowledge itself became a weapon too, and this might be the most underrated piece of the puzzle. Every generation of prehistoric people passed down information about which animals were dangerous, which times of day carried the highest risk, which terrain features made ambushes more likely, and which warning signs in animal behavior meant trouble was coming. This wasn't written down, it was told, repeated, demonstrated, and drilled into children through stories, mimicry, and direct instruction. A child who grew up hearing detailed, vivid accounts of predator behavior wasn't relying on raw instinct alone. They were carrying centuries of accumulated observation in their heads. This mattered enormously, because raw fear without information is often useless, or even dangerous, causing people to freeze or panic at the wrong moment. Informed caution, on the other hand, is precise. It tells you exactly when to be alert and when you can relax. As this body of shared knowledge grew deeper and more detailed across generations, the constant, formless dread of the unknown gradually gave way to something more manageable: targeted, situational awareness. You weren't scared of the dark anymore. You were scared of specific things in specific places at specific times, and that kind of fear is far easier to live with. There's also a landscape dimension to this story that often gets overlooked. As human groups spread and settled into more predictable territories, they began actively shaping their environment to reduce predator encounters. Clearing brush near living areas removed hiding spots for ambush predators. Choosing cave entrances or rock shelters with limited approach angles made defense easier. Positioning camps near water sources, but away from known predator trails, reduced accidental encounters. None of this eliminated risk entirely, but it stacked the odds in favor of the humans making these choices. Over enough generations, living in a landscape that had been deliberately shaped for safety felt fundamentally different from living in a landscape where every rustle in the grass carried equal, undefined menace. The world itself became less threatening, not because predators vanished, but because humans learned to read it, predict it, and quietly bend it in their favor. Population growth changed the equation too, in a way that's almost mathematical. As human groups grew larger and more numerous across the landscape, and as agriculture eventually emerged, humans began actively competing with predators for territory, rather than simply trying to survive within it. Large predators require enormous amounts of space and abundant prey to sustain their populations. As human settlements expanded, hunted local prey animals, and altered habitats, many large carnivore populations in human-occupied regions began to shrink or retreat to more remote areas. This is a slow, uneven process that played out very differently across different regions and time periods, but the broader pattern holds. Over enough time, in enough places, the sheer physical presence of large predators near human settlements declined. Less physical presence naturally meant fewer encounters, and fewer encounters meant each new generation grew up with less direct, lived experience of predator threat than the generation before. Fear that isn't reinforced by repeated real experience tends to fade, replaced instead by cultural memory, stories, and warnings, rather than constant lived terror. And that cultural memory is fascinating in its own right. Even long after direct predator encounters became rare for many human groups, the fear didn't vanish completely. It transformed into myth, folklore, and ritual. And stories about monstrous creatures in the dark, warnings passed to children about wandering too far from camp, rituals meant to ward off danger from the wilderness. All of these can be understood as fossilized fear, echoes of a very real, very ancient threat that had been converted into cultural transmission rather than lived daily experience. In a strange way, The fear of predators never truly disappeared. It just changed form, moving from the amygdala's immediate alarm response into the slower, more abstract realm of story and symbol. Even today, our fascination with monster movies, our uneasy feeling in dark forests, our instinctive flinch at the sound of a growl, these might be faint echoes of exactly the fear we're describing here, dormant reflexes that once meant the difference between life and death for our ancestors. So when we ask why prehistoric people stopped fearing predators, the honest answer is a bit more nuanced than a simple stopped. They didn't stop fearing predators so much as they systematically dismantled every advantage predators once held over them. Fire took away the safety of darkness. Group living diluted individual risk. Weapons flipped the power dynamic. Shared knowledge replaced blind panic with precise caution. Reshaped landscapes reduced the odds of encounters. And declining predator populations near human settlements meant fewer and fewer people ever needed to test that fear directly. Piece by piece, across hundreds of thousands of years, an existential terror was worn down into a manageable, even distant concern for most of our ancestors, until finally, for many communities, it faded into folklore rather than daily reality. It's a genuinely humbling thing to sit with, honestly, the idea that so much of what feels instinctive to us today, our comfort walking through the dark, our lack of daily dread about being someone's dinner, was hard-won, built slowly through fire, cooperation, tools, and memory passed down by people who had no guarantee any of it would work. If this journey through fear, survival, and the slow rewriting of human instinct fascinated you the way it fascinated us putting it together, make sure you're subscribed to Prehistoric People, because next time we're diving into another mystery buried deep in our ancestral past, and trust us, it's just as surprising as this one.